Hey everyone, this is Pete, and today we're taking a look at a game that I've really sort of discovered a fondness for recently, because I remember it having absolutely terrible reviews back in the day, but I've been playing it a bit recently and I've been having a very good time with it. It is of course Cruis'n USA for N64, which is a driving game from Williams, developed by Eugene Jarvis and a bunch of other people, and it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. It's very silly, and well, you'll see. You'll get the idea once we start playing it. So there's two ways to play this, or three if you count playing in two-player. You can do an individual race on any of these courses that you've unlocked. I've unlocked all of them because I've played this a fair bit. Or you can do a random race in the middle there. You can tweak your options in the middle here. Or you can do this Cruis'n USA mode, which takes you on a tour from the west coast to the east coast, although it skips a big bit in the middle, as you'll see when we play it. So let's choose that, and let's start a new race, because I was obviously halfway through a game when I last played this. Let's start a new race. I'm going to do automatic transmission, and you have 4 cars to choose from initially. But completing the Cruis'n USA mode on various difficulties allows you to unlock different variations on those cars. So you see I've got 3 variations of this one. They gradually get faster, and thus those faster cars are better for the higher difficulty levels. So what we're going to do, just for the sake of getting through the game relatively easily, let's pop the difficulty down to the easiest one. That means we shouldn't have to repeat too much stuff. And we'll pick this car, which I haven't used before. And let's begin. And head for the cockpit view. And enjoy the gratuitous digitized lady at the side. Because yes, this game is one of the most 90s games imaginable. In so many ways. So we begin in Golden Gate Park, crossing over the obligatory 90s 3D racer bridge. And you'll see this is quite a traditional timers and checkpoints style of racer. But rather than being lap-based, like something like Ridge Racer, it is point-to-point races, which I've been very fond of ever since I played Outrun for the first time. And there's actually sort of a fair amount of Outrun in this game, be that the absurd crashes, or the fact you're travelling from one place to another through a sequence of stages. It's not as seamless as Outrun is. You do have a gap between each stage, but other than that, each level does take you on a bit of a journey, which is nice. And of course, this being N64, you have twitchy analog controls to contend with, but I'm playing this with the 8-bit DOE controller that they made for the analog 3D. And that is an absolutely lovely controller. It's got a more sort of traditional controller layout than the standard N64 controller. So none of the 3-prong nonsense. But the other buttons are laid out as they should be on the N64. So that means you can play N64 games as they were intended. Only without a hand cramp, hopefully. And we've won! So we get the dancing lady. Isn't she lovely? But yes, this game is so MTV. It's I'd say it's painful, but I actually find it quite entertaining and appealing. I've got a high score, or a best time, or whatever you want to call it. And on to the next race. So we're now heading for San Francisco. Now this one does have a bit of a dodgy frame rate. Probably because of all the textured objects in this stage. And the fact they're quite close together. So the last one you might have noticed a lot of the trees and stuff were based on sprites. And you see when we're into that area there with the more trees, the frame rate gets a lot better because it's just using sprites. But in these built up areas it's using actual polygonal texture mapped objects, which is slowing things down a bit. Now obviously by modern standards that might look a bit silly, but it actually doesn't affect the playability because the controls are still nice and responsive. You never feel like the frame rate is actively getting in your way of enjoying the game, which is nice. So yeah, while we might be accustomed to sort of 60 frames per second races these days, and racing games are one genre where you do benefit from a nice high frame rate, it looks very nice indeed. I don't think this is a particularly unattractive game, actually. And it's got that typical N64 blur going on. But played some of decent TV with decent cables, or through emulation. We're playing on Mister here, by the Multi-System 2 from Hebert Electronics. And it's a great way to play. So I'm actually playing the game on a CRT, but also capturing footage through HDMI. So you're seeing the HDMI output. New record time. Very nice. Right, onwards to the next race. On to the US 101. Now, one thing you might notice about this game is it has atrocious music. but honestly, having played this a bunch now, I think it's actually part of the game's charm. That it sounds so ridiculous that all the music sounds like MIDI files you downloaded from the internet circa 1996. Just with the odd sample in there to make things even more ridiculous. So other technical things you might notice, you'll see there's some sort of there's some fogging in the distance with things sort of emerging from the haze. A very common technique in the N64 era to limit the draw distance and thus keep the frame rate up a bit, while also not having things pop in too obviously. I mean, obviously you can still see some things appearing, but the way they sort of gradually emerge from the haze rather than just appearing from nowhere was seen as a slightly more elegant solution than the alternative. So this is a nice easy race. Nice wide roads, just a bit of traffic to contend with. And as I say, we are playing on the easy difficulty because I just want to sort of show you the different tracks of this game without getting too bogged down in having to compete too hard against the computer opponents. And also, this is how you unlock new cars as well. Whoops, daisy. This is how you unlock new cars as well. So you complete a game on the easiest difficulty level, and that unlocks the second tier of cars. And then you complete a game on the middle difficulty level, and that unlocks the third tier of cars. And then I don't actually know if completing the game on the hardest difficulty level unlocks anything specific, because I haven't tried that yet. I'm just trying to unlock all three tiers of the existing cars first. There are some secret cars as well. I think there's a school bus and possibly a truck as well, I think. Yes, I just realised I forgot to play that full animation before. You see, very nicely presented for the era. Lots of polish, very arcadey, unsurprising since this was an arcade game. But also, rather than just being a straight arcade port, there is plenty of longevity in this game. Like, I've been playing this game a bunch and I'm not bored of it yet. Because there's a decent amount of unlockables with the additional cars. There's the secrets to discover. And then there's times to beat, leaderboards to top and all that sort of thing. This one is probably one of the hardest courses. It's quite interesting that they place it so early in the tour. But yeah, the narrow road and the twisty-turny nature of the corners in this one make it one of the more difficult tracks. Particularly while you're in this foresty area. You do emerge into the Arizona desert at the end of it, which is a nice little transition. So handling in this is very arcadey. You can pretty much hold down the accelerator the entire time. And then to get around especially tight corners, you can just sort of tap the brake. I find that really sort of feathering the brake on this is very effective. And just sort of repeatedly tapping it rather than holding it down. That allows you to maintain control without losing too much speed. Oh, you got past me. Don't you do that. Ooh, hello. We're not far from the finish line here, that's why I'm tense. There we go. Victory! And dancing lady, and lots of ladies in bikinis once again. Marvellous. So yeah, like I say, I remember this game having absolutely awful reviews when it first came out. And, you know what, I'm not entirely sure why. Because it's fun. And I remember thinking this a few years back, and I believe it had a much better reception in the States. I believe it had a much better reception from American games magazines. But yeah, for some reason I remember the UK magazines really panning this. And it becoming a big joke. I mean, I remember joking with my friends, it's like, oh, I'm going to buy a new N64 game. It's like, oh, are you going to buy Cruis'n USA? It's like, if anyone I knew had bought Cruis'n USA, they would have been the object of ridicule because of all these bad reviews, but I think I would have had a good time with this if I bought it back in the day. And I bet if I had my friends over to play it, which I did frequently during the N64 days, we would have all had a good time with it. Because there's a split screen 2-player mode in this. I think the sequel, Cruis'n World, actually had 4 players, but this was just 2 players, this one. But it's rather nice because you can play the 2-player mode in this World Tour mode. So you can play through the tournament and try and unlock things with someone else. Which is rather fun. Whoopsie! But yeah, there's a lot I like about this, and there's a part of what I like about it is it's not doing exactly the same as other racing games at the time. So like obviously at the time this came out, Ridge Racer would have been very fashionable. Ridge Racer was very lap-based racing, very drift-based. This still has obviously arcadey handling, but it's a different feel to Ridge Racer. It's not so different that it's completely inaccessible or anything like that, but it is different. And it works. It works for the kind of exuberant, over-exaggerated nature of the game, I think. And there's a nice mix of different courses. A nice sense of progression as you move from one stage to the next. Nice bit of background detail. You see the vehicles going over the bridge as we pass there. You've got the obligatory 90s racer aeroplanes and helicopters at various points as well. I just think it's quite a solid example of a 90s arcade racer. And I'm glad I finally took the time to actually give it a go for myself. Because those of you who've been following me for a while, either here on YouTube or through my writing about games and things, you'll know that I am strangely drawn to things that have had middling to poor critical receptions. And the reason for this is probably about 10-15 years ago or so. I was playing Gears of War on the Xbox 360. And I was having a miserable time with it. I was actively hating the experience. And I thought I was supposed to be playing this because it had good reviews, because all my friends liked it, because they were playing multiplayer, and because it was the new hotness at the time. But I was just having such a miserable time with that game, not enjoying it at all. And I got in a conversation with a friend online. In fact, I got in a conversation with several different friends, as I recall. And we were talking about RPGs. And in the Xbox 360 era, some of you might recall that felt like a bit of a dry spell for role-playing games. Because there weren't very many on Xbox 360 for starters. There were a few. There were things like Eternal Sonata, Lost Odyssey, that sort of thing. But there were a lot of stuff that... There was a lot of stuff that flew under the radar as well. And I got in conversation with these friends, and they recommended several things to me that they had encountered and enjoyed. One of those was the Art and Elico series on PlayStation 2 and PlayStation 3, which I played and absolutely love. And the other was the Neptunia series from Compile Heart. Now, Art and Elico always had reasonable reviews. I think the PlayStation 3 one probably had the worst critical reception, but it wasn't like notably bad. Neptunia, on the other hand, had consistently low review scores, and it was in that era where a lot of reviewers were trying a little too hard to be super progressive. And so any game that had attractive female characters in vaguely revealing outfits was immediately lambasted as being terrible for the world and the industry and all that sort of thing. And unfortunately, in many cases, those reviews didn't dive into things in any greater depth than the surface level of just looking at the character designs and going, ooh, girls are icky. Or attractive girls are icky, I should say. Whoops! That was a fatal crash if ever I saw one. But yeah, for some reason, urged on by at least one of these friends, I grabbed the Neptunia games for the PlayStation 3 and I played them through. And I thought, okay, in some respects, I get why these had low scores, because the first Neptunia game in particular is a technical mess. It runs at probably the worst frame rate I've seen of any PS3 game. But having grown up with games with what we might call flawed frame rates and performance, I didn't really have a problem with that. And so I looked past that to the story and the characters and the interesting mechanics that game was making use of. And I found a game that I really enjoyed. And so it was around that point that I thought, well, okay, this game had like a 43 Metascore or something like that. So like notably bad reception from most outlets. But it just got me thinking at that point, okay, if I've enjoyed a game that had that poor a critical reception, what else is out there that I have previously rejected on the grounds that reviewers didn't like it? And there's lots of things, and this is one of them. So it's taken me up until now with the Multi-System 2 and the Mister to really check this game out properly, because I hadn't really been satisfied with the status of N64 emulation up until this point. And also, I have an N64, but I haven't RGB modded it or anything, so the picture quality isn't great. So I'd been kind of holding off exploring too much N64 stuff until I got the Multi-System 2, because that then enables me to check out these games looking their best, which you might think is not all that great considering they're N64 titles, but you know what? I don't think this is a terrible looking game. It's got a sense of style to it. Admittedly, that style is 90s frat boy MTV, which you can probably take or leave depending on who you are and your feelings about such things. But I just feel like this is a game that kind of encapsulates joy. This is a game that is having fun being who it is, or being what it is. The developers obviously had a blast making it, and all they wanted was for people who played it to enjoy themselves too. And I think that really comes across. Yes, you can laugh at all the cheesecake women in bikinis and dancing girls and that sort of thing, but I think all of that was just a case of Eugene Jarvis and his team going, you know what would be fun? And then they put it in. So the arcade game, as I recall, actually has a scene of like Bill and Hillary Clinton in a hot tub at one point. But yeah, some of that was cut out for the N64 version. But we kept a lot of the other silliness in there. So this is the Grand Canyon, as you say. Yeah, I think this musical track is a good example of the dodgy music. It's like, listen to that guitar sound. That is like ad-lib MIDI. You got some sampled drums at least, which is something. The poor old N64 was a bit weak on the music front, because although its cartridges had quite impressive maximum possible capacities, the biggest ones were still only like 64 megabytes or so. And thus they had to rely a lot more on synthesized music rather than digitized music. And the built-in sound chip for the N64 just didn't seem to have very beefy samples in it, which always surprised me a bit, because the Super NES has such good wavetable sound for its music. Like, to this day, I maintain that Super NES music is vastly superior to N64 music. Like, you compare and contrast the soundtrack to Star Fox or Starwing on the Super NES to Star Fox 64 or Lilac Wars on the N64, and there is no contest. Absolutely no contest. The SNES wins massively. Same for Zelda. The music in Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask it's not terrible, but there are times when it's kind of grating. Whereas the Super NES soundtrack is absolutely triumphant. And a lot of that is down to them not being able to use recorded music. Or not being able to use recorded music without compressing it heavily. I do recall some games later in the system's lifespan that actually did feature digitized music. There was one of the Top Gear games, as I recall. But they had to crush the quality of it so much that it obviously didn't sound anywhere near as good as any of the systems that could pull audio from the CD or have playback the equivalent of MP3s or other forms of compressed audio that maintained a lot more of the quality but required more in the way of file size. So for N64 developers, I imagine that space on that cartridge is very much at a premium. And that's why in this game we have dodgy MIDI music. You have the flies hitting the screen in this track. You also get bird poo on your screen at times as well. But yeah, like I say, I'm sure there is plenty you can criticise about this game, and I'm sure plenty of you watching this are thinking, why is he playing that nonsense when so many better games exist? And the answer is just because this is a very likeable, enjoyable game. I'm having fun playing this. It doesn't matter to me that it wasn't the most well received. I just find it interesting that there is such that disparity in between what the critical consensus appeared to be at the time and how I feel about it. But like I say, these days I'm not surprised to feel that at all. I'm not surprised to feel these things at all, because that's just who I am. Annoying and arbitrary, some might say, but you know what? Supposedly bad games deserve a chance to be loved too. And I'm sure there are other people out there who love this game. And people who bought it despite the poor reviews back in the day and had a good time with it. And those people, I salute you, because you did the right thing. You didn't let someone else's opinion sway you and what you thought might be fun. There's the plane into Chicago now, with those Sprite-based factories at the side spewing out their Sprite-based smoke, except the smoke isn't actually moving, but they hoped you wouldn't notice that because you were driving past so fast. We're going 150 miles an hour after all. I think the best bit in this one is coming up just ahead, where you go into a tunnel and sort of the entire Chicago downtown is represented as one big Sprite. There it is. I love that. I love that. Creative use of technical limitations. Because obviously that's silly and a bit laughable by one standards if you know what they're doing there. But you know what? For the time, I think that's a perfectly acceptable, perfectly valid way of doing that. And it's little things like that just make this game very memorable for me. And I don't know how much influence this ultimately had on subsequent racing games, but there are certain little things about this game. Certain little things about this game that just remind me of slightly later races like Burnout. Like things like the big crashes, and this sequence here where you're driving under the L train in Chicago, and the traffic on the roads and all that sort of thing. Like I say, I don't know if this directly influenced other games like Burnout or some of the Need for Speed games, for example. But there's certainly elements here that would carry over into later racing games. I love the fact that they just skip out. They just skip out that whole middle bit because presumably it's boring. I think the implication is that you race the entire Grand Canyon, but they don't do that in real time because that would take a very long time. Right. Another sort of grasslands course. So we have insects and bird poo to contend with again on this one. This is the only course I feel is a little bit weak because it's very similar to the previous one that was like this. Like there's not a ton to distinguish it. But it's not a bad course by any means. Like there's no courses in this that I dread seeing come up. I mean, there's the Redwood course is difficult, yes, but I don't dread it. I think it's a cool course. And I've always been very fond of point-to-point racing games anyway. Like I say, I think it was Outrun that gave me a taste for that in the first place. And I've always been rather fond of that ever since, just because I think part of it is down to something I've talked about before, which is when I played driving games as a kid, I like to sort of fantasize about what it would be like to be able to drive a real car. And part of that fantasy process was thinking about traveling from place to place. And going around and around in laps on a circuit didn't provide me with that same feeling of going somewhere that a point-to-point race did. So that's why I always liked games like Outrun and Test Drive, and I would have liked this, because they provide that feeling of going somewhere. You're starting somewhere, you're ending up somewhere else, and you're going on a long journey. And I've always really liked that. And that's one of the things that's kind of annoyed me a little bit about the response to the new Mario Kart World on Switch 2. Because Mario Kart has always been about lap-based races, and thus that's what a lot of people were expecting from Mario Kart World. So when it presented them with a bunch of point-to-point races, they got all sniffy about it, to such a degree that they complained so much that Nintendo had to adjust the spawn rate of lap-based races in the online multiplayer system so that people would whinge less. Meanwhile, I picked up Mario Kart World specifically thinking, wow, cool. We get to use Mario Kart mechanics but on a point-to-point race. I really like that. Now granted, it would have probably been optimal if Nintendo had provided the choice, which I think is where a lot of people's objections came from. Because what you have in Mario Kart World is you have the sort of rally mode, which takes you on a long race from one end of the map to the other, which is a point-to-point race, which most people seem to be fine with. But the trouble is in the other multiplayer mode, where you just pick a course and everyone votes on what the next course should be. People don't like it when you have the driving from one course to another instead of doing the 3 laps. So perhaps what Nintendo should have done is keep that mode as just circuit racing and then have just the rally mode, and then maybe have some sort of custom mode to allow people to develop their own point-to-point races as well, which is probably what they'll end up doing in the long run. But it did kind of annoy me, because they had obviously designed that game very deliberately in that way. And they designed it that way so it was a bit different from previous Mario Karts, that people could enjoy in a different way. Because Mario Kart, whatever it was, 8, was providing an excellent circuit racing experience. So why would they just make it again? Particularly on a new console. So they wanted to do something different, but people didn't like it. But whatever. Doesn't really matter. It's not worth getting annoyed and upset about, even though I said I'm annoyed by it. I'm not that annoyed by it. I just found it a little frustrating that people weren't open to trying something a bit different and a bit new. Because I think it works really well, the point-to-point stuff. And people are like, "Oh, you can't learn the tracks." Like, yes, you can. You're just learning a track that starts in one place and finishes in another, rather than something that starts and finishes in the same place. So anyway, here's Washington. And we end with the best track on the soundtrack. The ooh ah song. Lots of tight corners on this one. But you'll see the easy difficulty is pretty easy. Because like even with a few crashes I'm still comfortably in the lead. And like I say, it does get quite significantly more challenging if you bump up the difficulty a level or two. And if you want to unlock all the cars, you have to do that. So, but this easy difficulty level is a nice way into the game that doesn't kind of put you off too early by making things too difficult too soon. This is just a nice breezy drive across the USA that you can enjoy without having to worry too much or stress about how your car's performing. And enjoy the dancing girls at the finishing line. And the shirtless man as well. So that's that. That is the complete US tour that we've done. We've gone from Golden Gate Park all the way to Washington DC. It doesn't actually reach the East Coast, I just noticed.
Welcome to the Hall of Fame.
You hot time. Coast to Coast in 22 minutes, 10 seconds and 40 milliseconds. Or 40 hundredths of a second, I should say. Press start to join the victory celebration. On the roof of the White House. And for some reason there's a farm up there. Faster car awarded. So you see there's the next award at that difficulty level. So you bump the difficulty up to that, use your faster car, and that way you gradually unlock the additional races. And then there is a Hall of Fame for the complete tour as well. Okay, that is that. That is Cruis'n USA for N64. So developed by Eugene Jarvis, is the director of the project. And then a bunch of other people working under him. Most of whom have their photos in the credits here, which is a nice little touch. I don't think there's any other names that I recognise in there. Matt Booty. Gingy Lahira, the racer hanser. Jeff Morrow, cruising vocals. Catherine Carrison is the starting girl. Nutza Hurling is the trophy girl. And Sal DeVita is the beefcake boy that we almost crashed into at the end there. And then the N64 team, a slightly different team. As I recall, the story behind this was that the arcade version of this was originally supposed to be based on N64 hardware, but then wasn't at the end. Which is why there's a bit of a disparity between the this version and the arcade version, which I think is where some of the criticisms came from. But you've hopefully seen from that it's not an awful game. It's pretty fun game as far as I'm concerned. And so I will continue playing it until I've unlocked it, and then I will probably move on to Cruis'n World and have some fun with that too. So we may well take a look at that in the coming weeks at some point as well. But anyway, that is enough of that for today. It just remains for me to say, as always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again next time.
Ooh.